In the years following World War II, the community of Claremont in northeastern Los Angeles County emerged as an important center of art and craft activity. In that small university town, artists and designers of many kinds devoted themselves to their creative pursuits with great imagination and energy, creating works that express the spirit and character of mid-20th century modern art and design in Southern California. It was an era of high spirits and optimism, a time of experimentation and dialogue among artists working in diverse media. It was also a time of camaraderie and cooperation. In Claremont's open and inquiring art community, artists like Paul Darrow forged lifelong friendships.
A lot of us have never gotten over those days, and we get together even now when I'm in my 90s.
It was a tight-knit group, both faculty and students, and it was a great time. It was a very great time.
Later on, I came to realize that that time frame was very special, and how talented and brilliant all of the artists of that time frame were in the 50s and the 60s.
Major funding for Design for Modern Living was provided by the Wingate Charitable Foundation, the Amundsen Foundation and Howard and Roberta Amundsen, E. Jean Crane, Gerald and Benta Buck, Harrison and Marguerite McIntosh, Tom and Carolyn Owen Toll, and the family of Helen Buckhorst. Additional funding was provided by the following organizations and individuals. The story of the development of a vibrant and influential art community in Claremont began in 1932, when the artist Millard Sheets received a temporary appointment to teach art at Scripps College. Handsome and charismatic, energetic and enterprising, Sheets was a creative whirlwind. Through his artistic skills, his entrepreneurial spirit, and his leadership roles in academia, business, and public life, Sheets became a powerful advocate for the arts in Southern California.
He just had everything happening right. I mean, he was the right person with the right talent, with the right personality, with the right following, and able to gather support from every direction. Charismatic. I think that all that came together in just the right way to cause all this fervor that was involved with the arts.
The artist's daughter, Carolyn, seen here in a drawing by Sheets, recalls her father's passionate belief in the power of art to enrich human life.
He wanted to excite people about life through the medium of art because he could give them a different dimension than they would get any other way.
Dad was an absolute believer in humankind. He saw the best in people. He saw the opportunity for people to work together and grow together.
Millard Sheets' early work shows his rural roots in the Pomona Valley and his deep connection with the California landscape. In the 1937 painting, Birth of Spring, Sheets celebrates nature's powers of renewal. Throughout the 1930s, Sheets experimented widely. Some of his depictions of city life, such as Angel's Flight, reveal a commanding vision of the urban landscape and an ability to achieve a deep cinematic perspective. With its dizzying high-angle view of tenements on Bunker Hill, Angel's Flight became an iconic image of city life in Los Angeles during the Depression.
Very early on in his career, he was seen to be a truly extraordinary artist, and when he was very young, he was chosen for one of the most important exhibitions, the Carnegie International Exhibition, and his work was shown at the Met in New York, the Art Institute of Chicago, and elsewhere.
While Millard Sheets received wide recognition for his paintings, he was, in fact, a master designer. A man who viewed every aspect of the material world in terms of design. His feeling for form, color, and movement, together with his skill as a visual communicator, brought him a great many design projects over his long career, including this 1934 mural for Bullock's Men's Store in Los Angeles, rendered in an Art Deco style. Other commercial projects, especially his work for Home Savings and Loan Association, propelled him into the realm of architectural design. Sheets' wide-ranging interests and skills as a designer, together with his leadership qualities, made him a compelling force at Scripps College. Almost immediately, he began building an exemplary art program, one of the few in the country that combined training in studio art with a thorough grounding in the humanities.
I think he had a very expansive vision from the very beginning of his experience at Scripps, expansive vision for what the arts could mean within the college and how Scripps could play a central role in the life of art in Southern California.
Many of Sheets' ideas about art education came from his experience as a student at Chouinard Art Institute in Los Angeles. While at Chouinard, he assimilated the educational model developed by the founder of the school, Nelbert Chouinard. Mrs. Chouinard believed that young artists should learn from practicing professionals who were recognized in their fields. Confident and enterprising, she was known for approaching artists of note who were passing through Los Angeles and asking them to teach a course or two at Chouinard. She attracted such prominent figures as the German pioneer of geometric abstraction, Hans Hofmann, the Russian Cubist sculptor, Alexander Archipenko, and the famed Mexican muralist, David Alfaro Siqueiros, who taught a class in fresco painting at the school. Following his appointment as head of the Scripps College Art Department in 1936, Millard Sheets adopted much of the Chouinard model, actively recruiting several noted artists.
He wasn't particularly interested in hiring academics, people who had vast teaching experience. He really felt that the best person to be teaching young, budding artists were other artists.
It was very free. Nobody was directed as to how they should teach.
I think that was one of the hallmarks of Millard, was the sharing and being willing to step back at times and watch the interaction, let things happen, and encourage, definitely encourage.
The department grew in stature by leaps and bounds. Students came from all over to study there. He really put art in Claremont on the map.
One of Sheets' first recruits was the ceramist William Manker. Manker's pottery stands out for its simplified yet elegant forms and subtly graded color effects. Manker also had a broad interest in interior design, and he served as a color consultant to House Beautiful magazine.
He had an assortment of mostly pastel glazes, and he did some airbrushing over the top, which would cause them to have that graded look. They're very attractive, and they had very modern lines, very clean.
In Claremont, Manker explored the idea of studio-based ceramics production. He established a studio and sales outlet in his home, an unusual venture at a time when most ceramic production took place on a commercial scale. According to the potter Martha Longnecker, who studied with Menker, his studio operation attracted considerable attention and contributed to the studio ceramics movement in Southern California.
And he had a beautiful ceramic studio at Padua Hills where he had people working for him, casting clay in forms he had designed. Wonderful pieces. I fired the kilns for him, which taught me a lot. So I learned immeasurably from William Menker.
The idea of solo production in a studio, one person designing, making, executing, and selling was something unique.
Another of Sheets' early recruits was the designer, Jean Goodwin Ames. Ames was involved in a wide variety of design projects and, together with her husband, Arthur Ames, helped awaken interest in traditional mosaic techniques in Southern California. Jean and Arthur Ames contributed to a revival of interest in yet another ancient medium, enamel. The husband and wife team showed that an old technique could serve the interests of modern design.
I have a particular interest in 20th century enameling, and she was one of the true leaders of the enamels field in the post-war period, she and her husband Arthur. I love her whimsical imagery. Almost all of her work portrays fantastical subjects, angels and demons and sprites and animals that are very imaginative.
All art students at Scripps College were required to take Jean Ames' design course.
There wasn't a fine art department and a decorative arts department at Scripps. There was the art department. And the one common denominator that everybody, including the architecture students, took was Jean Ames' design class.
The presence of progressive instructors like Jean Ames and William Menker was critical in establishing the direction and culture of the art program at Scripps, especially its broad, multidisciplinary outlook.
Millard was a painter and a watercolorist, and that was his foremost interest, but he really did have a comprehensive understanding and appreciation for all aspects of the visual arts and design and the decorative arts.
He felt exposure to different mediums was extremely important for an artist. It gave the artist more depth, more understanding, and they could think in many different directions, not just one.
In 1939, Sheets reached across the country to New York to recruit the sculptor Albert Stewart, who would become a cornerstone of the art program at Scripps College. Artist and gallery owner Barbara Baratich studied with Stewart while working on her MFA degree at the Claremont Graduate School.
I think the various artists who studied with Stewart, Svensson, Huter, Betty Davenport Ford, share the common thing that you have more solid, grounded, strong subject matter with an emphasis on this strength and on the line and on the power of the figure.
Albert Stewart was born in England and immigrated to the U.S. in his youth. He worked with one of the leading figures in American sculpture, Paul Manship, before moving to Claremont. Stewart's modern sensibility is evident in several of his works at Scripps College, including a cast stone sculpture of a mother and child and a more abstract bronze sculpture that he called Man and Nature. Both in his own work and in his teaching, Stewart emphasized the use of dramatic lines and edges to define essential features of the subject.
You'll have a flowing area and a sharp edge. Albert Stewart always said, You don't appreciate the softness of some form without seeing a sharp edge next to it.
Another distinguished artist that Sheets recruited was the pioneer American Cubist painter Henry Lee McPhee. McPhee's still-life paintings feature Cubist treatments of representational objects. From his appointment at Scripps in 1943 until his death 10 years later, McPhee conveyed to students deep insights into the construction of a painting. Millard Sheets' artistic stature, his energy and charisma, and the quality of the art program he was developing at Scripps attracted many talented young artists, including Martha Longnecker. She began studying painting with Sheets in 1941.
The man was a profound person in understanding the world. I really feel Millard is one of those great individuals that's born on the planet. He was so full of the joy of life. He was always positive.
While studying with Sheets, Longnecker found her interest moving away from painting and toward ceramics. She was fascinated by the magic of the potter's wheel.
I loved the tactile quality, and I loved all the symbolism of it also. You're centering it. In life, there's this centering process going on all the time. Then, as you grow it, grow the form, it will wobble. It cannot grow without wobbling. And you have to be quick to recenter. And so it's always growth, recentering. And I saw that's the way life is. It's hurdle after hurdle.
Like other people in the Claremont art community, Martha Longnecker welcomed opportunities to collaborate with fellow artists.
One day I had made this bowl and I told Millard he could decorate it. So we took some iron oxides and manganese and did this painting of horses and signed it. And I fired it, and this is what came forth. We enjoyed it, so we did another one. Millard chose to do a moving pattern, a kind of a jungle scene or forest scene. It has a horned animal, and it has some monkeys and big leaves.
The ceramic sculptor Betty Davenport Ford also found Scripps a welcoming and stimulating environment. Soon after enrolling in 1942, she noted a growing interest in abstraction among the staff at the college.
There were people teaching abstraction, and there was more abstraction in the course at Scripps than there had been in my previous studies. And so I realized that there was a basic shift taking place in art and in the attitudes towards art.
It was during a class at Scripps with the German émigré artist Susie Singer that Betty Davenport Ford learned the hollow building method used by Singer in her figurative ceramics. Although the styles of the two artists were markedly different, Davenport Ford found the hollow building technique highly useful in constructing ceramic sculptures, especially large ones.
I first learned the hollow building method from Susie Singer, and this was perhaps the most important single thing I ever learned from anybody, was that things should be built hollow. And this then I've continued throughout my entire career. I found that I could build at any size as long as I hollowed them out.
Albert Stewart was Davenport Ford's primary instructor at Scripps. Through him, she learned the importance of simplification and stylization in capturing the essence of her subjects.
When I'm designing something, I'm thinking of the essence of it. And simplifying did seem to be necessary, and I was glad to learn that from Stuart. And I have always used it since. Things are better if they're simplified. And the more realistic they get, the less you see the essence.
Betty is a person of tremendous capability in the sculptural sense, understanding the animals, being able to exaggerate and redefine what they are, and having the additional complement of a very strong ceramic background in which she could glaze them and have the subtle nuances that a good ceramicist would be able to give them.
In 1950, Millard Sheets asked another accomplished painter to join the Scripps faculty, Phil Dyke. Like Sheets, Dyke had attended Chouinard Art Institute in Los Angeles, and he too had created many distinctive California paintings. His high-angle view of the entrance to Newport Harbor at Corona del Mar became an iconic image of beach life in Southern California. To students at Scripps College, Dyke brought a wealth of experience, including knowledge of the animation field gained while working for Walt Disney as a color coordinator and story developer. Still another early member of the Claremont art community was the painter Milford Zorns. Zorns had studied with Millard Sheets, and he, like Sheets, developed a great fondness for the watercolor medium. In his work and in his teaching, Zorns promoted the California style of watercolor painting. Developed and popularized by Sheets, the California style placed a premium on spontaneity and free and expressive brushwork. Zorns described his love affair with watercolor this way. When you're painting watercolors, if you do it with a freshness and directness, and bring it off without laying washes over or making changes of any kind, it's a very satisfying thing. While the art program at Scripps College was well established before World War II, the war brought profound changes, both for the program and for the larger Claremont art community. Veterans came to Claremont in large numbers after the war, aided by the educational benefits available through the GI Bill of Rights.
Many of the vets from World War II chose the arts as the focus of their interest and really became some of the leading figures in post-war art in Southern California. I'm sure the pursuit of beauty, the pursuit of something ennobling, really helped to provide a counterpoint to the horrors that people had experienced during World War II.
Almost overnight, the number of students studying art at the Claremont colleges exploded. To accommodate the influx, classes were expanded, and GIs were admitted as special students. Paul Darrow was one of them.
One of the great miracles of the war, I think, was the fact that they had a thing called the GI Bill. And I was lucky enough to get into a marvelous school in Claremont, and I suddenly found I was surrounded by young men and young women in the same boat that I was in. Many of them have turned out to be established artists because of all this marvelous help that we got.
The GI Bill was very important in allowing many of these young soldiers to pursue a career in art. I don't think Many of them could have even considered that if they didn't have that opportunity. There's probably 40 or 50 artists that became known as the Claremont artists of people that came to study here.
The sculptor John Svensson is another of the many artists who studied at Scripps College and Claremont Graduate School under the GI Bill. Like his mentor, Albert Stewart, Svensson is known for strong, well-defined forms.
John Svensson was perhaps the most closely influenced by Stewart. They were very close, and he worked as an assistant to Bert for many, many years and was very much like a son to him. His work is powerful, as Stewart's was. His technique is impeccable.
Regardless of the sculptural medium, clay, wood, or stone, John Svensson has maintained a deep feeling for his materials and for the physical acts of carving, chiseling, and modeling.
To me, I enjoy the fact that whatever sculpture I do, no matter how smooth it is, I like to see a chisel, the evidence of the chisel mark somewhere that I might have used in it.
Although Svensson has worked in many materials, he has a particular fondness for redwood.
I like redwood because I can depend on the grain being straight normally, and that's what I like because you don't have many surprises. When I'm working in wood, it's like working in stone. Right now, I'm still creating. It's my main joy in life, and it's, I guess it always was and always will be, and I'll do it as long as I can.
In the post-war period, the range of stylistic and material concerns among artists working in Claremont was extremely broad. While John Svensson was exploring stylized forms of naturalism, other young artists like Jack Zajac and James Huter approached sculpture from a more introspective and experimental point of view. Jack Zajac began his studies in Claremont as a painter, but he discovered sculpture while studying under a scholarship at the American Academy in Rome. His forceful depictions of human and animal forms show an interest in surrealism and expressionism. Through exaggeration and distortion, the fracturing of planes, and the use of coarse and abraded surfaces, Zajac created powerful works that evoke feelings of surprise, apprehension, and wonder. In contrast, the early sculpture of James Huter is quiet and contemplative. In his figurative works, Huter explored issues of structure, balance, and abstraction, as well as the psychological relationship between the viewer and the art object. There is an aura of ambiguity and mystery in works like Walking Girl. Huter's striking vision of an elongated split figure had its origin in a dream. In Claremont's open and inclusive art community, artists like James Huter and Jack Zajac were free to pursue independent paths.
There was a remarkable degree of tolerance and support of unique individual visions. There was no one prevailing style, no one approach to art making. There was a great celebration of diversity, variety, and individual artist vision. There could be no more diverse a body of artists representing widely divergent points of view. If you think of James Strambotny's work, for example, and you compare it to Carl Benjamin, who were friends and colleagues, they're distinctly different.
During his days at the Claremont Graduate School, James Strombotny thought of himself as the conscience of the world. Deeply disturbed by human ignorance and cruelty, Strombotny created works like The Group, in which he employed an acidic, cartoon-like style to make disturbing political and social statements.
My way of working in the 50s and 60s was a stream of consciousness. The subject matter that I felt compelled to do had to do with man's inhumanity to man.
In the 1958 painting Pro Patria, Strombotny depicts a Kafkaesque landscape of anonymous and gratuitous violence.
There are three figures carrying a dead figure, and you can see that the dead figure has been brutalized. And it's a symbolic painting. This has to do with inhumanity in general. It was important to me at the time to make that statement.
Strombotny's friend Carl Benjamin was equally committed to his work, but pursued a very different artistic agenda. Benjamin studied art at the Claremont Graduate School under the GI Bill, receiving his MFA degree in 1960. Even as a student, he was highly independent. He valued his artistic intuition above all else and preferred to learn through rigorous experimentation.
For Carl, he was obsessed with the idea of pursuing a single formal idea. He would latch onto it and he would go with it for 10 or 20 paintings. And then he would go on to another idea.
Carl Benjamin often employed grid-like structures in his hard-edged geometric abstractions. Yet his work was never formulaic. He approached each painting as a unique, creative journey, relying on his intuition for guidance. In an interview recorded in 1994, Benjamin described the inner process through which he determined the color relationships in his paintings. He started by blocking out basic forms.
After I get a certain amount of form decided upon on the canvas, I just stare at it until it says a color. And then once that color is there, then the color, and I look at the color next to it, and that says a color. That's the feeling I get when I paint. I'm waiting for this impulse to, a shape is going this way, and then you want it to go that way, and it's impulsive kind of, almost a kinesthetic response to a canvas, and the same with a color. You almost adopt a listening pose.
Like Carl Benjamin, the painter and sculptor Roger Kuntz studied art under the GI Bill. In Claremont, he added yet another perspective to the growing company of artists working there. Fellow students were particularly admiring of Kuntz's painterly skills.
Everybody acknowledged that Roger Kuntz was one of the best painters of the bunch, and that he put the paint on in a way that we all envied.
Roger just loved to paint. I mean, just the physical act of putting paint on canvas, he just loved it.
Today, Roger Kuntz is best known for his series of paintings of freeway structures and traffic signs. In these bold and architectonic works, Kuntz transformed familiar artifacts of the Southern California freeway system into modern icons.
He started a freeway series which was just dynamite. It was a wonderful formal exercise for him. He was very passionate and excited about the freeway paintings, and he had a great show in LA and it got good reviews.
One of Kuntz's close friends in Claremont was the artist Paul Darrow, who studied at Scripps College and later taught there. Darrow experimented with abstract expressionism in his student years, which can be seen in this early still life. A decisive influence in Paul Darrow's journey as an artist was the Japanese-American painter Sueo Sarasawa, who taught at Scripps College. Sarasawa's interest in Buddhism was particularly important to Darrow. Sarasawa stressed a kind of art-making that is spontaneous, intuitive, and unself-conscious. Through Sarasawa, Darrow gained greater trust in his inner creative process.
He was the man that came along and put the key in the lock for me. You can't see some things until somebody points them out to you. The lucky thing is, it's part of the miracle of being a creative person, is that you are always on duty. You're always looking, and your mind open, we hope.
Consistent with his desire to work in an intuitive and spontaneous manner, Darrow began collecting found objects and arranging them in collages, often incorporating calligraphic elements.
I was making collage-type stuff when I was a young boy, and I had no idea what it was. And when I found out about collages as a grown-up, I said, well, gee, I've been doing those things, you know, but I haven't been doing them as art. They're art.
Ex-servicemen like Paul Darrow, Roger Kuntz, and Carl Benjamin, men who had known the comradeship of military life, discovered a new kind of camaraderie among their artistic peers in Claremont. One of their favorite gathering places was Seal Court at Scripps College.
It was a great time. It was a very great time. And yes, there was a camaraderie. And simple little things like the 10 o'clock in the morning coffee hour at Seal Court.
You had all these students coming out of classes who had been working in different mediums, and they were sharing what they were learning. So if I had been in there painting and someone's telling me about sculpture, you know, you're learning all that time.
I remember having an architecture class up here with Ricky Pedersen, and always coming through the courtyard and seeing Paul Darrow outside, just sitting there talking with people. And there was this constant kind of stimulus.
With his appreciation for good design in all areas of life, Millard Sheets sought to eliminate the artificial separation of art and craft. At Scripps, he encouraged students and staff alike to explore a variety of media.
I think his whole emphasis had to do with artists and designers working together. There was a cooperation in terms of architecture, in terms of painting, in terms of ceramics. They say today it's all about mixed media. Millard was probably the first.
Experimentation flourished in the open and encouraging atmosphere at Scripps College and the Claremont Graduate School. One of the chief agents of experimentation was Richard Pedersen. In 1947, Sheets hired him to replace William Manker, who had stepped down as head of the ceramics program.
He was a very generous teacher, and he would share any of his knowledge freely. But he also had this experimental nature. So anything that was new, he would try. He's known for putting together ceramic cooking pots and ceramic sinks, and even working in glass and enamel, so he didn't limit it just to ceramics.
Richard Pedersen brought an international perspective to the ceramics program at Scripps. In 1952, he invited the principal leaders of a philosophical and aesthetic movement known as Mingei to give a demonstration at Scripps. They included the famous Japanese potter Shoji Hamada and the British ceramist Bernard Leach. The Mingei movement encouraged an attitude of humility and naturalness among potters, while also promoting the revival of folk traditions.
This was a whole movement in ceramics led by Bernard Leach, and a group of craftsmen who were really interested in bringing back those natural folk arts.
For the potter Martha Longnecker, the encounter with the ideals of the Mingei movement proved life-changing.
It influenced her to no end. She went to Japan, she studied the Mingei movement, she studied their philosophy.
It was truly a life-changing experience. They started by saying we first had to learn about humility. The East wants to work with nature. You don't try to control your life, you observe, but then life opens up to ways that your own mind could never even present to you. That's the philosophy of it.
Later, Martha Longnecker would found the Mingei International Museum in San Diego. Developing such a large cultural institution required an enormous act of faith, recalls Longnecker's friend, Carolyn Owen Toll.
She said she felt she didn't know how to run a museum and she wasn't sure she could do it. And she started with a tiny step and it's grown into a world-famous museum in 35 years. Pretty amazing.
With artists working in a wide variety of media and sharing actively with one another in Claremont, influences moved freely across disciplinary lines, often in surprising ways. For example, the ceramic artist Harrison McIntosh found his greatest inspiration in the architecture of Richard Neutra.
When his parents built a house in Los Angeles, he actually got them to come and look up Richard Neutra, who ended up building their very small but very modern home for 1939.
I was just interested in making works that would hopefully have a certain timeless quality and a simplicity that you find in contemporary architecture.
He's interested in structure and form, very pure form, and I think that comes from architecture.
Harrison McIntosh, or Harry as he is known to family and friends, studied ceramics with Richard Pedersen at the Claremont Graduate School under the GI Bill.
He probably would never even considered going to graduate school if it hadn't been for the GI Bill. The GI Bill allowed him to really be a full-time student and really dedicate several years to studying ceramics.
McIntosh's aesthetic interests and attitude toward pottery show him to be in sympathy with modern currents in art. To him, it seemed natural to treat ceramic objects as works of art in their own right, not defined or limited by function.
They are delicate, graceful, and yet firm and architectural. The colors are superb. Everything is refined, just as Harry is.
There's a kind of an amazing serenity to his work and an amazing serenity to him as an individual also. And I just have great admiration for a man who has created this body of work over a lifetime, where he's really held to a vision and has found infinite variety within that vision. A very simple, spare, organic forms, but has found just extraordinary range and depth and beauty within this vision.
Later, McIntosh would take his work in a more sculptural direction, even as he continued to draw inspiration from nature.
This is a good example of using forms from nature that started earlier with the gourd forms such as this one, and this was the egg form, which I used a great deal for some of the first sculptures. When you're looking at it from all different sides, you see different patterns reflected in the chrome.
For many years, Harrison McIntosh shared a studio with his good friend and fellow ceramist, Rupert Dees, also known as Rummy. Dees brought a strong sculptural sensibility to his ceramics, creating spare yet striking forms.
This was quite typical of his work because most everything that he made became very sculptural and mostly abstract forms.
One of the more experimental ceramic artists working in Claremont in the post-war period was Paul Soldner. Soldner was known for stacking hand-thrown pottery forms and creating large sculptural works.
When Soldner came along, he was more interested in ceramics as an art form, pushing the limits.
While teaching ceramics at Scripps College, Soldner became widely known for his experiments with a Japanese pottery technique known as raku. In this method, the artist yields a certain amount of control in the firing process in order to achieve surprising surface effects. Soldner developed a variation on the Japanese method and became known as the originator of American raku. As an artist with an entrepreneurial bent, Millard Sheets sought opportunities for studio potters to participate in commercial ceramic production. This benefited the artists financially, and it also helped raise the standards of commercial ceramic design. In 1963, Sheets was hired as a design consultant at Interpace, a major manufacturer of architectural tiles, dinnerware, and other clay products. As an advisor to Interpace, Sheets created an innovative Artist in Industry program, recruiting such accomplished studio artists as Harrison McIntosh and Rupert Dees.
In the United States, it was unheard of, really, to bring in a design team and to bring in artists to create for the consumer market.
Ceramic historian James Elliott Bishop recalls Sheets' passionate admonition to executives at Interpace.
Millard Sheets brought in the ceramicists and said, let them do what they want. His idea, his concepts was, let them create and don't interfere with it.
Harrison McIntosh designed a wide variety of architectural tiles for Interpace. According to his wife Marguerite, he was well suited to the work because of his love of architecture.
Harrison, having had a long interest in architecture, designed some of the most successful tiles because he always thought of those tiles in relationship to the surface of big buildings. And he made interesting texture.
No venue in Southern California contributed more to the popularizing of modern design in the post-war era than the art department at the Los Angeles County Fair in Pomona. Millard Sheets served as Director of Fine Arts at the fair for 26 years, during which time he made the venue a vital showcase for art and craft.
He put on exhibits that you couldn't do today unless you were the Metropolitan and had millions to spend. The depth of those exhibitions was just incredible.
Millard Sheets' son, Tony, now directs the art venue at the fair. It is housed in the Fine Arts Building, a 12,000 square foot gallery designed by the Los Angeles architect Claude Beelman and built in 1937 by the WPA, or Works Progress Administration.
There weren't a lot of places to go to see art. Museums were scarce, and so the fair, the Fine Arts Building, became a real destination for people to come and see art.
Millard did really see the Los Angeles County Fair as an extension of the educational role that he played at Scripps College. There were very few places where the public could see modern and contemporary art in Southern California, and the fair, particularly during this period, was one of those few places, and people turned out in huge numbers. In some instances, over 1 million people attended the art component of the fair alone.
In mounting large exhibits at the Los Angeles County Fair, Millard Sheets relied upon the assistance of many young artists associated with the Claremont colleges. His support staff included such figures as Paul Darrow, James Strumbotny, Jack Zajac, and a talented young woman named Susan Lautman Hertel.
Sue was so good, and she was so gifted, and she was a wonderful draftsman, and she could draw circles around most people.
When she graduated from Scripps, she went to work for Dad, which turned into a 40-year career. Sue and Dad loved horses, they loved dogs, they loved cats.
Susan Hertel often painted scenes from her own life, including this one in which she is seen riding in the hills above Claremont.
She had such a kinship with nature, with horses, with her environment, and such an utterly at-home feeling in the world, and no artifice.
One of Millard Sheets' deepest and most abiding beliefs was that the artist has a responsibility to serve society and to elevate the quality of human life through art. A powerful expression of that belief came in the form of a visionary exhibit he organized for the LA County Fair in 1951 entitled One World of Art. Presented on the heels of World War II, the large exhibit affirmed shared human values through a display of art from around the world, including the former enemy nations of Germany and Japan.
It was after World War II, and he was showing work from Japan and Germany and all over the world, and some people were upset about that. But he saw it as a means of unification after the war.
He wanted to help heal the world, literally, after this time of destruction. He wanted to bring people back together.
In 1952, Millard Sheets organized another groundbreaking exhibit at the fair, 6,000 Years of Art in Clay. The ambitious show traced the history of ceramics through 670 objects gathered from around the world.
Its primary focus was on modern and contemporary art, but it showed modern and contemporary ceramics within the context of 6,000 years of history.
Perhaps the most impressive and influential show organized by Millard Sheets for the LA County Fair was the 1954 exhibit, The Arts of Daily Living. For this large exhibition of contemporary art, craft, interior design, and home furnishings, Sheets joined forces with Elizabeth Gordon, the editor of House Beautiful magazine. Together, they created 22 demonstration rooms, displaying modern work by craftspeople from Claremont and throughout California. House Beautiful magazine devoted an entire issue to the exhibit.
And Millard said at the time that one of the reasons he wanted them as a colleague was that they were the magazine that everyone in this country read. It was a shelter magazine. It was the foremost publication in the field, and it would have the widest impact on the audiences that he wanted to reach nationally. And it was a hugely successful exhibition.
The Arts of Daily Living exhibit also highlighted the vital role of architecture in modern design. Several architects and designers contributed plans for the demonstration rooms. John Hill designed a living room with faience tiles by Richard and Alice Pedersen. And George Wright designed a television room that showcased furniture by the master craftsman Sam Maloof.
Sam was an extraordinary individual. Quite early on in the 1950s, he became quite a prominent furniture maker for many colleagues, artists who were living and working in the Claremont area. Over the decades, he became widely recognized.
With its clean, sensuous lines and meticulous fit and finish, Sam Maloof's furniture became emblematic of mid-century modern design in Southern California. Even today, years after his death, Maloof's handsome designs are still in demand, and they continue to be produced in his studio by craftsmen who once worked with Maloof. Gregarious and charismatic, Sam Maloof did much to foster social connections among the Claremont artists.
Sam was a magnet. He could relate to anyone, and in a wonderful way.
Sam, like Dad, was a Pied Piper. He had that ability to bring people together and make them feel important.
In time, the creative surge of the post-war era would ebb, and leaders like Sam Maloof and Millard Sheets would pass from the scene. Currents in art would shift, and new artists working in Claremont would explore new territory. Artists like the ceramic sculptor John Mason and the master of light and space, James Turrell. The continuing vitality of the Claremont art community is evident at the annual Padua Hills Art Fiesta. Begun in 1953, the Art Fiesta was conceived as a place for the public to meet practicing artists and to observe them at work.
There were several potters that worked here. Lindley Mixon, my father, Tony Ivins, Rupert Deese. There were painters. Phil Dyke was here. Robert E. Wood was doing silkscreen printing right here under the olive trees.
Looking back over the rich history of the Claremont art community, the post-war period continues to stand out as a time of exceptional creative activity and achievement. In those memorable years, Claremont artists like Millard Sheets, Sam Maloof, Harrison McIntosh, and Carl Benjamin made deep and indelible marks on the cultural landscape of Southern California.
It was a flowering. It was just a very special time that saw a lot of very gifted and special people working in the same community.
I have such high regard and respect for the time I grew up in. It was a wonderful, wonderful time to be alive.